The power of freely given love, what makes a relationship last. Love in its truest form cannot be coerced, bargained for, or demanded. It must be freely given. This simple but staggering truth forms the bedrock of all relationships that endure not only in time but in eternity. Freely given love is not rooted in performance, possession, or power. It springs forth from a place of authentic choice, mirroring the love God offers to each human soul. Where manipulation, fear, or obligation reign, love wilts. But where freedom lives, love flourishes. St. John Paul II, in his seminal work, Love and Responsibility, asserts, "Only the person who has a free will can love. If there is no freedom, there can be no love, only fear, compliance, or counterfeit affection." This aligns with the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which teaches that God created man a rational being, conferring on him the dignity of a person who can initiate and control his own actions. CCC 1730. The freedom to choose is not only a philosophical or theological concept, it is the fertile soil in which all genuine love grows. In romantic relationships, freely given love distinguishes the superficial from the sacred. A love based on utility, what someone can provide, how they can make one feel, what boxes they check, is transactional, not transformational. While such partnerships may last in appearance, they often corrode internally over time. In contrast, love that is freely given is not calculated. It flows naturally, not as a result of convenience or manipulation, but out of a deep desire to will the good of the other. Scripture repeatedly draws us into this truth. Consider Hosea, who is told by God to love his unfaithful wife, Gomer, as a reflection of God's enduring love for Israel, Hosea 3 verse 1. God does not abandon his people when they fail. He continues to offer them love, not because of what they do, but because of who he is. Likewise, in Romans 5:8 we hear, God proves his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. This is the purest expression of agape, love that is not earned, but offered. Psychological research reinforces the power of such love. Dr. Sue Johnson, founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy, EFT, has demonstrated through decades of study that emotionally secure bonds are formed not through perfection, but through responsiveness and vulnerability. When a partner senses that they are loved not only at their best, but also at their weakest, the bond deepens and strengthens. Freely given love creates emotional safety. This is echoed in attachment theory. Healthy, secure attachment comes from caregivers who respond consistently, not conditionally. Children who grow up knowing that love is not contingent on their success, mood, or obedience grow into adults who are capable of offering that same unconditional love to others. But when love is given only when certain conditions are met, it fosters anxiety, fear, and emotional fragmentation. Relationships that endure are those in which each person knows with certainty that their beloved is not tallying mistakes, but treasuring the soul. Yet this does not mean that freely given love is permissive or without boundaries. On the contrary, authentic love, like God's love, is both merciful and just. St. Thomas Aquinas defined love as willing the good of the other as other. Freely given love does not cling, possess, or try to mold another into one's own image. It desires the other's true good, even when that good requires sacrifice, confrontation, or letting go. The concept of gift lies at the heart of lasting relationships. Pope Benedict XVI, in Deus Caritas Est, wrote, "Love is an ongoing exodus out of the closed inward-looking self towards its liberation through self-giving." To love freely is to give oneself, not as a hostage or martyr, but as a conscious offering. It is not reactive, but proactive. It is not transactional, but transcendent. Many relationships collapse under the weight of unmet expectations, but freely given love releases the illusion of control. It does not ask, "What do I get?" but "What can I give?" Not in a codependent or self-negating way, but in a mature, generous, spiritually rooted way. This is the kind of love seen in 1 Corinthians 13, where love is patient, is kind, does not insist on its own way, is not irritable or resentful. Freely given love does not mean staying in toxic relationships or tolerating abuse. Rather, it means refusing to become bitter, vengeful, or closed off in the face of betrayal. It means being able to love from a distance, to forgive without reconnection, to hope without expectation. Jesus on the cross demonstrates this in full measure. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. The highest love is not dependent on the response of the other. Neuroscience offers support for this understanding. Studies on oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, show that consistent, safe, freely chosen bonds promote neural growth, lower stress levels, and create feelings of trust and connection. In contrast, relationships based on fear or uncertainty activate cortisol and adrenaline, which degrade both the brain and the bond over time. In other words, the body itself recognizes and responds to authentic, secure, and uncoerced love. Sociologist Brené Brown, whose research on vulnerability and connection has reached millions, affirms that love can only exist where vulnerability is honored. In her words, love is not something we give or get, it is something we nurture and grow. Her studies show that people who experience real connection are those who are willing to be seen, not as idealized versions of themselves, but in their raw, imperfect humanity. When two people freely choose each other every day, not once at the altar or in a grand gesture, but in 100 quiet, sacrificial moments, they build a love that lasts. Love that is freely given is renewed daily, not out of obligation, but as a decision rooted in faith, will, and grace. St. Augustine said, "Love and do what you will." Not because love licenses sin, but because this kind of love requires self-mastery. One cannot give what they do not possess. To love freely, one must be free inwardly. This is why the saints often speak of detachment, not from people, but from disordered attachments and internal compulsions. St. Francis de Sales teaches, "Love is the perfection of the soul. It is the sun of the universe. It is the bond of all things." And this love, he insists, must be ruled by reason, faith, and divine grace, not emotion or need. When people enter relationships with unhealed wounds, they may seek love not to give it, but to fill a void. This leads to codependence, control, or emotional addiction. Freely given love can only flow from a heart that is first rooted in God. This is why Christ calls us to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, so that we may be able to love our neighbor as ourselves. Matthew 22:37-39. The Eucharist is the ultimate expression of freely given love. Christ gives his body and blood without demand, without pressure, without performance. He offers himself to the worthy and the unworthy alike, not as a prize, but as a gift. And he does so knowing that many will walk away, ignore him, or consume him without love. Still, he gives. This is the mystery that makes Christian love distinct. It is not sentimental or utilitarian. It is sacrificial, patient, and unthreatened by rejection. When modeled in human relationships, it does not always lead to immediate happiness, but it creates deep and lasting joy. It forms the kind of union that can withstand the storms of illness, poverty, betrayal, or even death. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux spoke of her little way of love, not grand gestures, but small acts done with great intention. Freely given love does not require spectacle. It is content with the ordinary. It finds God in folding laundry, waiting in silence, making tea, forgiving again. It does not perform, it abides. And this abiding is what makes a relationship last. Feelings fade, bodies change, seasons shift, but love that is freely chosen and freely given deepens with time. It becomes less about what one receives and more about what one becomes. In loving, we are sanctified. In choosing to love even when we are tired, angry, or misunderstood, we become more like God. This love transforms the lover even more than the beloved. Freely given love purifies motives, softens pride, teaches humility. It reveals the falseness of control and the power of surrender. It invites the human person to participate in the divine life, to become a living icon of Christ, who gave all and asked for nothing in return except our hearts. When we speak of lasting love, we are not speaking of survival or endurance alone. We are speaking of love that grows in depth, tenderness, and holiness. Love that reflects heaven. Love that chooses again and again, not because it must, but because it is free to. Freely given love is also resilient. It weathers failure without shattering. It recognizes that to love is to face risk, the risk of not being understood, not being loved back in the same way, or even being abandoned. But it does not retreat into bitterness or self-protection. Instead, it leans on grace. It remains faithful to its own nature, even when the outcome is uncertain. This is why St. Paul can say in Romans 12:21, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Love that lasts doesn't respond to betrayal with revenge, but with mercy, rooted in truth. To love someone freely is to allow them to be a mystery. It is to resist the urge to categorize, to control, to predict every move. It is to remain present in the unfolding of who they are. In this sense, love is an act of awe. The Catholic mystics often describe God's love as a consuming fire, a mystery too vast to grasp, yet intimate enough to indwell the soul. Human love, when patterned after divine love, adopts this posture, reverence, not ownership. In this way, freely given love protects the dignity of both persons. It does not reduce the other to a role, a function, or a need meter. It sees the soul first. In Love and Responsibility, St. John Paul II warned against the utilitarian attitude that creeps into relationships when love becomes about usefulness. He urged that the only proper response to a person is love, never use. This truth, so simple, is the foundation of any relationship that survives the test of time. As people age, their bodies and capacities change. What remains is the essence of the person, their soul, their heart, their story. Freely given love adapts. It does not mourn what is lost so much as it honors what remains. It celebrates presence over productivity, being over doing. It sees the beloved in their suffering and says, "I choose you still." This love is embodied in the Catholic vision of the sacrament of marriage as a path to holiness. Marriage is not merely a legal bond, but a sacramental encounter in which two souls participate in each other's sanctification. The Catechism affirms this in paragraph 1641. By the grace of the sacrament of matrimony, spouses help one another to attain holiness in their married life and in welcoming and educating their children. This is a love that transforms ordinary days into sacred offerings. It is the kitchen floor swept for the 100th time, the hand held through chemo, the silence borne with patience, the promise kept when no one is watching, the decision every morning to stay. In the spiritual writings of Saint Elizabeth of the Trinity, love becomes a dwelling place. "Let yourself be loved," she writes, "for love is not something you do, it is someone you become." Freely given love changes the lover, not through force but through a quiet, radical reorientation of the heart. The one who loves freely becomes more tender, more patient, more courageous, not by striving, but by resting in the reality that love, when true, does not end. In a world that glorifies independence and self-protection, this kind of love appears foolish. But 1 Corinthians reminds us that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. 1 Cor 1:25. The cross itself is a scandal to pride, a contradiction to selfishness. It reveals a love so free that it embraces loss, so pure that it conquers death. This is not weak love. It is the strongest force in the universe. Many modern relationships are built on performance, on curated images, conditional loyalty, or mutual benefit. But what makes a relationship last is not performance, but presence. Not consistency of feelings, but consistency of intention. Not the thrill of infatuation, but the decision to stay when the excitement fades. It is the slow, steady giving of the self that brick by brick builds a foundation that cannot be shaken. This is the love that parents offer their children, especially when children rebel. It is the love that forgives the spouse who forgets the anniversary. It is the love that visits the nursing home, week after week, when the beloved no longer remembers your name. These quiet moments are not romantic, but they are sacred. They are the hidden places where love becomes eternal. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10, we see freely given love in action. The Samaritan owes the wounded man nothing. They are strangers, even enemies by cultural standards. And yet the Samaritan draws near, tends his wounds, and pays his costs. This is love not born of duty or debt, but of compassion, of the freedom to choose kindness in a world that rushes past. Relationships built on this kind of attention and care, especially when no one is watching, are relationships that endure. One of the great wounds in modern society is that many have never known this kind of love. They've been taught they must earn love, compete for it, or contort themselves to be worthy of it. But this is not the love of Christ. His love calls us by name, sees us as we are, and still says, "Come." When people begin to receive love freely, they slowly learn to give it. This healing can happen within a relationship. When one person offers love freely, without pressure, without scorekeeping, it invites the other to come out of hiding. It gives permission for imperfection, creates space for vulnerability, and fosters trust. Over time, this can break cycles of defensiveness, fear, and shame, but it must be sustained. Freely given love cannot be withdrawn in moments of pain. It must remain constant enough to teach the other person they are safe. This is why love is not only an emotion, but a form of discipline. It is formed through habit, cultivated by prayer, strengthened through suffering. The saints often speak of love as an interior crucible, a place where the soul is refined. Freely given love does not avoid this crucible. It enters it willingly, confident that God will bring resurrection from the ashes. In Isaiah 43:1-2, God speaks to Israel, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." The same promise applies to those who love. When love takes us into deep waters, God remains present. His love undergirds our faltering steps, and in Him we find the courage to keep offering our hearts, even when they've been bruised. This kind of love requires self-mastery. One cannot give what they do not possess. To love freely, one must be free inwardly. This is why the saints often speak of detachment, not from people, but from disordered attachments and internal compulsions. In the writings of Saint Teresa of Calcutta, we see a love that persists even in spiritual darkness. For years, she experienced a painful silence from God, and yet she continued to love the poor with joy and devotion. Her journals reveal that her love for Christ was not based on feelings, but on fidelity. "Love, to be real," she wrote, "must cost, must hurt, must empty us of self." This love is not glamorous, but it is divine. It is also countercultural. In a society that values success, image, and pleasure, freely given love is often dismissed as weakness. But the cross tells a different story. The cross shows us that the strongest love is the one that gives without demand, suffers without complaint, and forgives without condition. This love can heal generations. It can break family cycles of abandonment, betrayal, and manipulation. It can restore hope in hearts long resigned to despair. When a child experiences unconditional affection, when a spouse receives mercy instead of wrath, when a friend is shown grace in failure, something eternal is planted. And that seed, though it may take years to bloom, is never wasted. Freely given love is not naive. It sees clearly, it knows the risk, it understands the cost, and still it chooses. Not because it expects return, but because it trusts that love itself is the reward. This is the mystery the saints lived. It is the call of every Christian vocation, to love not only those who love us, but those who hurt us, misunderstand us, leave us. The Catechism states in paragraph 1825, "Christ died out of love for us while we were still enemies." The Lord asks us to love as He does, even our enemies, to make ourselves the neighbor of those farthest away. This radical love which reaches across divides, which forgives 70 times 7, which stays when others walk away, this is the love that lasts. In the end, all relationships are crucibles of the soul. They reveal our need for healing, our hunger to be seen, our fear of being rejected, but they also reveal our capacity for grace. When we learn to love freely, we participate in the divine. We become co-creators of peace, ministers of mercy, witnesses to a kingdom not built on power, but on love. This is what it means to love with power, not domination, but dignity. Not manipulation, but maturity. To love someone and say, "You are free. I do not need to own you, change you, or control you to keep you. I only desire your good. And if love calls me to step back, I will. And if love calls me to stay, I will stay with strength, not desperation." In such love, the soul is set free, not to wander, but to belong, not to consume, but to commune, not to fear, but to rest. This is the love that does not end, the love that reflects eternity, the love that, in the end, makes life worth living.